The waters of the Blackstone River were diverted here to power a system of canals and tail races for the Waterford Mill Complex. Mill number 3, known locally as the Mammoth Mill, was built in 1836 and developed a reputation as the finest producer of woolen fabrics known in the Republic. This 400-foot-long mill required a lot of water power and employees, many from County Westmeath in Ireland, to run the mill. These freestanding granite archways were once the spillways for the water power that kept the looms working. And then it all came to an end when the mill burned in 1877. Hi, I'm Chuck Arning, National Park Service Ranger here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And just think of the stories that lay hidden here among the weeds and the debris of the ruins of the Mammoth Mill. There's a certain air of mystery here, and we're seeking the answer to the question of how can we uncover the stories that lay here among the fallen brick and mortar. Well, to answer that question, we're going to take a little discovery trip to see how the various branches of the National Park Service and a local historical society can work together to uncover these stories and learn how best to preserve them. So join me as we head into Boston to solve a puzzle in Douglas and to see how this old mill ruin in North Smithfield figures in the equation. Traveled down from the Blackstone Valley to probably one of the most historic areas in all America, Boston, Massachusetts. State Capitol building is just up the street behind me, and historically, we're right here. We're in the center of the African-American community here in Boston. Matter of fact, the 1790 census in America, Massachusetts was the only state not to have a listing of any slave holdings. And yet the term separate but equal was probably founded here in Boston. Now, how do we know this? Well, through some good, solid detective work, utilizing the technological branch of the Park Service, the Cultural Resource Center, and those tried and true park rangers, we've been able to uncover some fascinating facts about the African-American community here in Boston as they try to give education to their children.
Well, the impetus was a decision by project architects to turn what used to be the back door of the Smith School into the main entrance for visitors in the future. And so this required the courtyard to be completely excavated out and for provision for handicap access as well. We suspected that there were archaeological resources back here, and testing back in 1991 by Leslie Mead indicated that there is a large and very significant archaeological feature, a privy situated back here that was threatened by project construction.
Most of the archaeology I've done has been plantation archaeology, and this is the first urban site that I've ever done. This is the first free black community I've done. It's very, very complex. I mean, although I'm used to dealing with smaller sites, I also have dealt with larger sites, and this is a very, very small area, but the amount of interpretation, the amount of history within this one site is incredible. It was used as a veterans meeting hall for a number of years, up until about the 80s, to be honest, 1980s. So knowing all that activity is going on, you want to get as much of stuff out of there, so we found things like Coke bottles and cigarette wrappers and stuff like that. So you want to get all the modern stuff out, and after you get the modern stuff out, with a little more care with the shovels, you go down further. And then we use trowels, and we actually find out, we dig a lot more carefully the further down we get. But we had some idea that we knew privies were out here. We didn't know the extent of them. A privy is a bathroom facility in the ground. Now, processing has just started. The city of Boston handles the processing of the artifacts, the initial processing, which is the washing of the artifacts and the labeling of it. After that, then it goes to Lowell, to the Cultural Resource Center, and from there they're going to actually interpret the artifacts, and then we'll find out exactly date ranges.
This is the cool stuff, the goodies. Most of this material came from the privy in the back lot of the Smith School. And we strongly believe that this privy was probably built around 1849 as part of the restoration of the school. Right now, the contents of the privy look like they seem to be coming from the second half of the 19th century, which does appear to be consistent with what we suspect about the privy. And some of the things in the privy are sort of what you'd expect for a schoolhouse. Like, for example, we have marbles. We have some plain white clay marbles. We have glass marbles. We have some stone marbles. Looks like this one's sort of like an agate color. And we have a beautiful hand-painted marble. This is the only one of these that we have, at least so far. It's got a little floral pattern and lines on it and everything. And you could just imagine some little boy, you know, playing with these things. It's so cool. Things that you might not expect for a school are clay pipes. And clay pipes are sort of like the cigarettes of the 19th century. Disposable ways of injecting yourself with nicotine is basically what they are. And we have some different types. We have a standard TD pipe, which was sort of like the Lucky Strike of its day. It's sometimes called a working man's cutty. This one is unusual in that it is whole. Usually they're broken, or we only find fragments of it, fragments of the stem or fragments of the bowl. It's also unusual in that it was never used. There's no burn marks on the inside. So this one was probably brand new, broken, and got thrown into the privy. This is also another interesting one because it has a patriotic slogan written on it. It has the words "Home Rule," and these types of pipes were very popular with the Irish working class in the second half of the 19th century. There are some more interesting ones. This particular bottle has Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup written on the side of it. And this was a very popular nostrum that mothers used to calm their babies that had colic and other things. It was a significant portion of it was opium. So they were essentially drugging their children up. And what most people are commonly aware is that in the 19th century, opium was not a prescription drug or a controlled substance the way it is now. And it was available in all kinds of forms. And you often see advertisements from the 19th century with drugs that would claim to be the cure for everything, including diseases that we have no cure for today. And significant portions of those were alcohol or opium. And we have at least 2 bottles like this that say Dr. Munn's elixir of opium on the side of them. So those are pretty interesting. What you see in archaeology is what it was really like. I mean, so that we have documentation that says that the schoolmaster at the Smith School was supposedly keeping that back lot clean. But so far our evidence suggests that he wasn't keeping it as clean as he should have been. So what we're looking at is archaeology is historical reality in a lot of ways.
I've never dug a privy, and that was, it was rather trying at times, but it was a very, very exciting thing to dig. I mean, privies are constant dumping sources when they're in use. And after they are not used anymore, they're a big garbage dump. You know, you just fill as much stuff as you can in there. It did have a very distinct smell as the further down we got. It still was, even 100 and over 130 years later. It was just a lot of good 19th century artifacts came out of there. And it was, it's going to be a nice site to interpret in terms of looking at the specific artifacts and what they mean.
And that we'd like to ideally preserve much of this archaeological evidence for visitors to see as they pass through this part of the site. Trouble is, as you can see, these areas are filled with water, they're now dangerous, and that it'd be very difficult to stabilize what's here. Yet at the same time, we'd like to have the visitors experience the site somehow. So the very reason for us being here to actually create a safe, accessible site mitigates against preserving what we found in place. So that's the dilemma, that this will have to be covered up. Much of it will be destroyed as a result of the construction. So the question is, how does the visitor experience what we can see today, but which will be gone tomorrow?
To understand how the science, the archaeology, can help us rangers interpret the history of our particular site, I figured the best person to talk to was a ranger here at the Boston African American Historic Site, Frank Middleton. Now, Frank, this is a fascinating dig that they've uncovered some really interesting evidence about life here in the African American community. How does that help you tell the story?
Well, it really helps us a lot because as an interpreter, we're able to show the people that we bring around and tell this story to some actual physical evidence of existence of people in this neighborhood. We have structures, we have buildings, which are nice, and a lot of the buildings that we have on our trail, we're not even able to go inside. So with this archaeological dig, it really helps us because we get to uncover the story. We get to find out more about the lives of these people. When we're talking about pipes and toothbrushes, those are things that are real. We can say, wow, this was something that was used by someone who lived in this time period. So it helps to put a lot of those pieces to the story together. When we think about this archaeological dig here and what that has shown us and what it's uncovered is really the fact that the school committee, in a lot of ways, tried to maintain this idea, tried to maintain the notion of separate but equal. You had a very well-organized free black community here that was hooked up to the power structure, so to speak. Garrison, Wendell Phillips, very prominent members of Boston society. And they are petitioning and they are noticing right away that their education system is less than their white counterparts. And they realize that they want to do something about that. And they try to integrate the school systems. And they see that Boston's notion of separate but equal is not becoming a reality for them. So this school and this archaeological dig really can uncover a lot of that. We think about this school and the overcrowded conditions. It's hard for us to imagine when I say deplorable. What's deplorable? Well, here you have children, over 200 children going to this school who are playing right next to the privy system in a very small space. So you can imagine the stench, the smell from the privy system and just the unsanitary conditions. There were a number of people in the black community who were really skeptical of integrating the school systems. They were afraid for their children. You know, what would it be like? Would their children be able to keep up with the white school? Seems that they had been, you know, since they had been left behind for so long, that was a concern for a number of people in the black community. And there were others who said, well, if we don't integrate, you know, if we do not start this assimilation process, we will always get something secondary. We'll never, you know, the education is in the white schools. And if we allow them to just give us a black school, it won't be the same. So there was a number of conflicts within the black community, and they were able to talk them out. And at different times, you had different fractions who were able to establish themselves better than others. I mean, here in Boston, the forces that favored integration eventually won over. Just as human beings, as people, that change is difficult. You know, there were a number of people here in Boston who were they were horrified of the idea and notion of sending their children to schools with black children. Horrified. And it took a number of years for them to actually see that, well, maybe that wasn't going to be so bad. But change is a difficult thing, you know, and we have fears and inhibitions about a number of things. And oftentimes, our fears are greater than the reality. That's really a lesson that I get from this, is that we can really be afraid of things because we don't know. Fear of the unknown. And then once it becomes a reality, we say, well, it really wasn't that bad. You know, what was so horrible about the idea and notion of black boys and white boys going to school together? You know? I don't know.
The layering of history, the stages of struggle and evolution as a people tries to find its way, and using the tools of the archaeologists and the stories of the ranger, we as Americans get a sense of our past. But I tell you what, let's head back to the Blackstone Valley, because there's another detective story that's unfolding. However, this time we won't use archaeologists as our detectives, but we'll use National Park Service building and architectural conservators, as well as a very active local historical group. So come along, Watson. Let's see what mysteries are unraveling here.
Jencks Store started in 1834, so it's been around for over 150 years, and played a major role in the continued development of the industrial base in the Blackstone Valley, and certainly in the village of East Douglas. Ebenezer Balcom, who was the builder and first proprietor of the store, started under unusual circumstances. In 1828, no one would have thought that Ebenezer would have been opening a store. His family petitioned the court making a complaint of excessive idleness and drunkenness. And it was only a few short years later when he recovered from his drinking problem and built the store. Together with his wife Polly, they operated it for about a year until his untimely death. Unfortunate for him, but fortunate for us, in that we have a probate document listing all of the contents of the store, which is a great historical record to have. Everything from sundries, groceries, furniture, everything needed to run your everyday life and to run your business could be purchased here. The store is really a unique glimpse at a slice of history that is disappearing.
The Douglas Historical Society, one of our partners here in the National Heritage Corridor, to make sure they spent their limited funds to gain the best results, contracted with the Cultural Resource Center of the National Park Service to do a historic structure report. Our detective work takes us back to their lab in Lowell as we understand the process of dating a building.
And it said in the National Register nomination that this building had been constructed in 1825. And in looking at the building, David and I thought, well, that might be a little bit early. So with that as a starting point, I went into the archival records, the primary documentation, like the tax assessment records, the registry of deeds, looking at maps, photographs, just putting together a whole collection of the written works. What does the paper trail tell us about the building? And then after compiling that, then we look at the building itself, at the building materials, at the building style. And by putting all of that together, not just any one thing, you can get a very clear picture of a building and how it evolved. We found out that the building was not, in fact, built in 1825. It was built 10 years later, in 1835, 1836, by Balcom, who built a store on the site. The building, it was built in the Greek Revival style, which was very typical for the 1830s. But in the 1830s, in small towns like East Douglas, there were no architects. Architects were very rare. Asher Benjamin was an architect who realized this, and he wrote a book, actually a number of books, but in 1833, he wrote a book called The Practice of Architecture. Well, what Benjamin did was he put together a number of drawings of examples of Greek Revival architecture and details that carpenter builders could go out into the towns and use in their construction. And the fun thing is, I pulled this book out from our library and found some, it looked like it was taken right out of this book, some of the details that we have in the Jencks Store. So here we have a book that came out in 1833 and a building that was built in 1835, very obviously using this book as a source. You look at all different clues. You look at the nails, at the paint, at the plaster, at the lath under the plaster, the style of the doors, the hardware. The hardware we'll talk about when we're out there has a terrific story to tell, especially in this building.
What was really fun and interesting to deal with was a lot of the physical evidence, things that weren't done at the lab but we'll have a review here in the building. And that brought us to hardware, which had a few surprises. We documented window latches, and when we were doing other types of hardware, we discovered this Carpenter Rim Lock.
Well, the Carpenter locks were originally patented in England in January 1830 by James Carpenter. And I was doing some research on another project, coincidentally with this project, and found an article in Antiques magazine dated 1954 that said one of the very interesting things about the Carpenter locks is that they have inscribed on them initials that help in the dating, very precise dating of the locks. So I called up John and said, John, why don't you try scraping some of the paint on this lock and see if we have some initials to see if it helps us with the dating. So John came up.
Yeah, and I came up and removed some of the paint, exposing the brass, and found exactly what Barbara had pointed to. The lock is inscribed Carpenter with a small inscription or a picture of a crown, and the initials WR, which stood for William Raining, which clearly dated the manufacture of the lock for us, telling another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. William was William IV, the reigning monarch at the time, and he reigned from 1830 to 1837, which fit right in with the construction of our building in 1835.
We're here in the Jencks Store, one of the old general merchandise stores here in the Blackstone Valley, with David Bitterman, who is the project manager for the Cultural Resource Center. And as you notice, we have a little Halloween motif over here. And we happen to be in the store because it's the focus of one of the very interesting projects here in the Blackstone Valley. Now, David, you as a member of the Cultural Resource Center, we think of technology and the expertise of your group. But in essence, you're much more than that, aren't you?
We are. We're actually an organization within the Northeast Field area of the Park Service that provides these types of technical and planning-oriented project services to the various parks within that area. And essentially, we consists of not only architectural conservators, but historical architects and preservation craftspeople, as well as objects conservators and archaeologists. And together, all of those skills brought to bear on a single project really give us a great advantage in being able to look at it in a very holistic sense. And I think really in informing the types of treatments we're able to bring about on these projects. We have actually about 6 tons of brick masonry suspended over our heads. It's a really unique sort of thing to do, but when you think about the fact that we're in a general store, it makes sense because we have a large sales area here that I think there would have been a motivation to keep open. Rather than having the mass of the chimney come down and being supported on a foundation, they were very creative in their framing and actually suspending of the chimney structure. There's actually a full kitchen fireplace with brick oven and ash dump up above, backed up to a parlor fireplace, and other stove openings on the 3rd floor above that. What they've actually done, though, is to suspend that end of it with a king post truss up in the attic. They couldn't put a king post truss at both ends of it, unfortunately, so on this end, they actually carried down to the foundation with an iron column. And oddly enough, although the king post truss has a little bit of distress up in the attic, most of the problem here is with this iron column because the footing has settled and we've had a lot of downward deflection in this area. So part of our treatment will be to address the column problem and to give it a better footing, and another part of our treatment process will actually be to reinforce the king post truss up above. Originally, we looked at this and wondered what a unique situation this was in terms of a way to frame a chimney, and thought, well, probably this is a result of an alteration. But by going through the process of doing an historic structures report and having our architectural conservator look at various things along the way, we pieced together the evolution of the building and finally came to the conclusion that this was an original feature. And as such, it's certainly worthy of being preserved as that. It's rather unique, in fact, in terms of a structural solution. I've not seen another example of this large of a chimney suspended from framing above.
David, this is a good example of the complexity of this chimney structure, isn't it?
It is, Chuck. This is actually a king post truss. You can tell it's a king post because of the center single element that comes down and is in tension. It essentially carries most of the loads from down below. Up on top, what you can't see above the chimney, it engages the 2 diagonal top cords, which are in compression. They have a tendency to want to kick out in either direction because of the weight of the center post pulling down. And they're restrained by a bottom cord, which is also in tension. They're restrained out at the ends on the eave walls of the building. And essentially what's happening is that although the king post truss design, I think, is appropriate for carrying this sort of weight, it would have admirably on its own, they framed other elements into it as well, including these 2 major lateral girts that carry floor loads. And the girts, unfortunately, frame in just adjacent to where most of the load is being imposed on the truss, so that because of the mortises and tenons of the girts framing in, the 3 iron rods which drill through the bottom chord and carry the weight of the chimney down below. All of that going on in this very small area has really stressed the wood of the beam to the point that it is pulled apart right at that juncture. In fact, you can see it's pulled apart almost 3/4 of an inch. If you look at the holes for the trunnels, the trunnel has remained in place here, and the hole on this half of the member has migrated about 3/4 of an inch that way. You can also see it at the mortise that was chopped from the top for the head and washer of the rod that drops down in this hole that it's pulled apart almost 3/4 of an inch. Essentially what we'll be having to do is adding some discrete reinforcements so that when the floorboards are all back in place, you really won't be able to see it. But we want to reinstate the tensile capability of this beam so that it won't have a tendency to want to pull apart anymore, and essentially restore the original validity of the truss design.
The Historical Society is a small nonprofit group, but by reaching out beyond our walls, we've been able to make a network to help preserve this building. Building partnerships, including the National Park Service through the Blackstone River Valley Heritage Corridor, local business partners who are interested in preserving the building, and other community members, local and statewide, are coming forward, realizing that this is really a part of the Commonwealth and our common history. We're at a point today that we have excellent planning and documentation in place so that we are ready to start our actual physical preservation of the building. The documents are really the foundation for all good preservation. Preservation planning is the tool. Many times people wanted to move forward and we put a damper on it simply because we need the planning tools in place in order to make the preservation really match correct history and interpret the building in an appropriate fashion. But I think people are feeling good about the building. It is becoming more and more of a focus and a gateway into the Blackstone Valley. And it goes slow. The work is not necessarily seen. It's structural things that really will ensure that this building and its very important collections are preserved for years to come. So it might seem like it's taking us a long time, but the building has stood for 150 years. We're hoping to ensure that it will be here for at least the same period of time.
Believe it or not, there is a connection between the Abiel Smith School in Boston, the Jencks Store in Douglas, and this mill ruin here in North Smithfield. They were all finished in mid-1830s, and they were the centerpieces of their communities, an urban community, a rural community, and here, a working community. Well, this has been Ranger Chuck Arning of the National Park Service here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And with a little help from our friends, we've hoped you've gained a little more understanding about life here in the 19th century in America. But there's still so many good stories to tell. I guess I'm going to be pretty busy, huh? Well, anyhow, come on down the Blackstone Valley and join us as we try to discover the stories of our past.